Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Happy end of quarter, if that is applicable to you. Happy end of April, if that's what you're celebrating today. Whatever it is, we're going to have a good day, as Savannah mentioned. So I'm looking forward to spending this next 27 minutes with you and sharing some tips and tricks I have for prospecting. It looks like we're pretty even on the poll as far as things we wanted to look through and talk about today. So as Savannah mentioned, there is a Q&A box for you to enter your questions in. I will leave time at the end to cover all of those questions that we can get to, and the ones we don't get to, we will send an email recap afterwards with the answers for you. So don't worry, we will cover these questions. One of my biggest pet peeves is when we don't cover questions, so I will make sure we do that. Wanted to give a little background on who I am. My name is Erin Leonard. I am an account executive here at Outreach. Started my career at DocuSign in 2017 pre-IPO as a prospecting MDR for the public sector. Helped them build out the public sector team, moved to be an account executive on the public sector team at DocuSign, then came down to San Diego, joined a startup called Classy, which sells fundraising software for nonprofits, led the SDR team there for about 2 years and made my way over to Outreach. So looking forward to sharing what I've learned along the way and things I've learned from some of my colleagues as well. So looking forward to jumping in, and without further ado, let's get to it. So we're going to talk about two main things today. What we're going to talk about is how to plan for prospecting and how to execute your prospecting effectively. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll leave time for questions. Awesome. Okay. So planning for prospecting, how do you plan effectively? You will see that a lot of your prospecting will really land with your prospects when you are intentional and you have a purpose and a clear vision as to why you are prospecting. So whether you have KPIs that are set for you from leadership or from your organization, or you're setting them for yourself, give yourself parameters around what the expectations are weekly, monthly, quarterly, however you want to measure it. That will help guide your choices as you go to prospect. So for example, here at Outreach Weekly, I need to add 16 prospects to a sequence. So whether you use Outreach or not, maybe you're using a different sales tool, sales engagement tool, think about how many people you want to add weekly and do a little sales math. Work backwards from your conversion rates and start to recognize, if I'm converting these leads to meetings at a 8-10% conversion rate, what do I need to put in at the top of the funnel to get to my goal at the end? So give yourself a little room to do some sales math. Work backwards to get to that number of how many people you need to actually communicate with and reach out to net new weekly or monthly, quarterly, however you want to measure that. I also have a dollar amount goal. So beyond just sequencing these 16 people each week, I am responsible for $250,000 in self-source pipeline each quarter. So that is helpful for me to understand what type of accounts I need to go after, who are going to be my big bets, my big whales that are going to bring in 6-figure deals, who are the folks that I can help with these quick wins, these smaller deals. And I try to do a combination of both each week as I prospect. So if you are always fishing for the big fish, it's going to be hard to fulfill your number if anything slips. So you want to have a good combination of accounts that you're going after that are the larger ones, as well as the ones that you can have for quick wins, smaller deals that'll help you keep pace to your number. Okay, second thing I will say, you should always identify target accounts. So whether that is a name that you really want to have for a logo, whether it is a size of an organization where you can land the biggest deal you've ever sold, whether it is somebody who's on a competitor that you want to make sure you bring over to your product, identify target accounts. I typically have 10 to 15 because I have a larger book of business. So think about your total book of business and how many accounts you have, and then pick somewhere between 10 to 20 accounts, depending on how large your book is. Now, obviously, if you're a strategic account executive and you only have 20 to 25 accounts, 10 of those are not going to be target accounts. Maybe you have 5 that are target accounts versus if you have 40, 50, 60, 70 accounts, maybe you have more like 15 target accounts. Again, this all goes back to strategy and how you're going to plan to prospect. So if you know why you're reaching out to somebody and why you're going after them selfishly as motivation, it'll help you determine who you need to reach out to and how you can communicate with them on your side. We're going to talk about how you can communicate with them effectively for their value propositions, but this is just about you and planning and getting organized. So target accounts, super helpful to be clear on what you need to do and how you need to get there. I've also found that dedicated times are really helpful. So I am actually sharing my calendar with you here at the bottom of the screen. And you'll notice I have quite a few prospecting blocks. It is very difficult to be a full cycle rep and prospect, manage deals, run demos, do pricing conversations, deal with negotiations, and close deals and make sure your customers are onboarded. And then for some of you, you're even renewing those accounts and making sure that they're happy throughout the cycle with your company. That's a lot to manage. And so I found that if you give yourself clear blocks of when you're going to be prospecting, it will help you focus, turn off Slack, turn off your phone, focus for that 20, 30 hour-long block and do the prospecting that you need to. I try to break up my prospecting. So on Mondays, I'm adding folks to a sequence. I'm determining who I want to communicate with that week. I'm adding them to my sequence or my messaging. And then I am starting some of those emails. By Tuesday, I'm getting into the completion of my emails and I'm starting calls. By Wednesday, I'm finishing up any extra emails, follow-up emails, multi-threading I'm doing some tasks in LinkedIn. And then typically Thursday is my final call block in the morning where I finish out all my calls for the week. So this helps me stay organized. I will say it's totally personal. So if you feel that doing 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the afternoon on the same day is helpful to you, just give yourself a brain break and a really clear time where you're focused on prospecting. It is really, really difficult to clear out the noise when you're in a full cycle role. So just make sure, and even not in a full cycle role, if you're a BDR and SDR, you still have Slack, you still have email, make sure you just pause everything, focus on what you're doing. One of the best books I ever read, from a recommendation from a former sales manager, actually, Jeff Shelby, I read Fanatical Prospecting, and it changed the way that I looked at prospecting. So if you've not read Fanatical Prospecting by Jeb Blunt, I highly recommend. All of my SDRs at Classy read it, and it really changes the way you look at how you're going about your day. He talks about having uninterrupted hours and really focusing on what you're doing, and that's where this idea comes from. I know there's a lot of ideas around there, out there as far as time blocking and productivity timers. If that works for you, great. But point is, give yourself safe space where all you're doing is prospecting. Okay, I'm going to pause here and I'm going to look at the Q&A really quickly just to see if there are any questions on this. The book name, I will repeat one more time. It's called Fanatical Prospecting by Jeb Blunt. All right, so let's talk about executing. So this is now executing your tasks. Now this is anybody who's actually prospecting. So AEs, BDRs, SDRs, AMs, renewal managers, whoever needs to prospect. Here's some of the most effective ways that we found you can actually execute your tasks. One of my colleagues, Jordan Friedman, he actually shared one of the best tips that I have seen in a long time. And that is that PSs on emails really work. So we saw that only 5% of emails contain a PS, but they have a 35% higher reply rate. And I'll show you an example of one of the emails that he sent with this tactic on the next slide. PS is a great creative way for you to engage somebody. So think about that, think outside the box. These folks are getting hundreds of emails, if not thousands of emails. And so you need to find a way for you to stand out. And while you need to be relevant to the content that you're sending to them with their value propositions and their focus of their business, you also can use creative tactics such as a PS to boost that reply rate a little bit. Don't forget to have fun with your messaging. So a lot of the messaging we've seen that works is utilizing some sort of humor or talking about a topic you have in common with a prospect. So if they're posting about a sports team that they really like, maybe you're commenting in your email about the latest game that just happened. I know that a lot of folks on the East Coast, where I'm from, are big Bruins fans, and it's peak season right now for the Bruins and playoffs. So maybe I'm going to sprinkle that in if I notice that somebody's commenting on hockey on LinkedIn, or if they have experience playing hockey, maybe I'll put that into my email. So use a little bit of fun and lightheartedness. I think that everybody wants to know a human's reaching out to them instead of a pre-automated message. And so for these target accounts, like we talked about, and where you're focused on a specific account you want to go after, utilize creative messaging because that will really help you stand out. Always keep in mind to keep things professional. So obviously, we've seen horror stories about people using terrible grammar or really misspelling things. Keep it professional. You're still in a professional setting. So while you want to be lighthearted, you want to make sure that you're still delivering value in the email. So if you're going to say something that's a little bit lighthearted and more fun, give them something that's really meaty and helpful to their business that you've recognized how you can help them and what their bottom line or their goal is. Third bullet is be concise. Nobody wants to read a long email. If it does not fit on somebody's phone, they will not continue reading it. So use that as your rule of thumb. This is one I used from a former sales leader, David Rubenstein. If it doesn't fit on your phone, nobody's going to read it. So think about being short, to the point, and really getting your message across in the first 2 to 3 paragraphs of your email, because the odds are they're not reading past that. So just make sure that you are actually getting the meat of what you're trying to ask for in those first 2 to 3 paragraphs. Fourth point, I will say, don't start sentences with I. I had a CRO one time that told us that if we started sentences with I and sent him an email, he would delete them. That means you are focused on yourself rather than you are focused on what you can deliver to your prospect or your customer. So while for some of us who are really focused on grammar and proper spelling, it's okay to not start a sentence with I. We can do things like noticed you replied to this on LinkedIn, or recognize that you were just highlighted in this certain article or on this podcast. So it's okay to not use proper grammar. Starting a sentence with I statistically shows that people are less likely to respond or open your email. So that's just a quick hot tip for you. Huge one coming up next. Always spell your prospect's name correctly. My name can be the female version with an E or the male version with an A, and I cannot tell you how many times I get emails that name me Aaron. And you can bet that the first thing I'm doing is hitting delete on that. So if you can't spell your prospect's name correctly, it is a huge red flag. So make sure that you are very clear with how to spell somebody's name, and also to when you meet them that you know how to pronounce their name. And if you don't know, you can always ask, but make sure that you're treating people with respect. That's always just the golden rule of making sure that you are communicating effectively with these folks. Okay. Last point here is going back to your planning. And that is that 80% of your time spent prospecting should be focused on your 20% of your top accounts. So if you have a large book of business, this is really where it's important to understand your book of business and how you can pare it down. If you have hundreds of accounts, maybe you have 150, 200 accounts that you're covering, think about that top 20% of those accounts when you really look at who's a great fit for your product. And 80% of your prospecting time should be spent on those top 20 accounts. This is where you're going to see a higher return and where you're going to see your conversion rates improve. Okay. Let's get into some examples. So as I mentioned, I wanted to share what it looks like when you use a PS. So this email was sent with a PS here. Wanted to say congratulations by sharing this gift card. This is another hot tip. If you are using anything like Alice or Sendoso, always helps to give a little $5 gift card for coffee or for lunch if you have the ability to do that. And then somebody responded right away and said, I'm not sick of Starbucks at all. Thanks so much for the gift card. So they noticed that PS and addressed it as their first sentence response. They referred him to somebody else, and here's Jordan, and he got to the right person directly from this PS and this response from the first person. So wanted to prove to you that PSs work. It's a great suggestion, something maybe new to try in your prospecting. Okay, here's another example of something that is really concise and really clear to follow. So one of my former colleagues, Kevin, he would use these emails that would bullet out exactly what he was reaching out for. And he had a lot of success in response rates because he was getting to the point. He was telling them what the ask is. He was telling them what he was giving them in return, and then what the goal of the call was or the conversation. I think this works well maybe on email 3 or email 4 as you're already kind of warming them up and sharing with them who you are and why you want to chat with them. This is a good, here's who I am. I'm putting it all out there. This is why I want to chat with you. So try using bullet points in your email. I think that also draws people's attention to those points on the email. Using bold or underlined is also helpful. So get creative. This is one that would be really easy to read on their phone because it's bulleted and it's clear, straight to the point, concise. All right. So moving into what type of communication is actually effective. So if you are using outreach or using another sales engagement tool, there are a few key pieces here that you should be cognizant of as you build your cadences, sequences, modes of communication, rhythms of communication that you are reaching out. We know that it takes between 8 to 15 touches on average to get a response from someone. So if you are only emailing 3 or 4 times and you are not mixing in a phone call or a communication on LinkedIn, whether it's a message or a connection request, that is really, really critical. You need to have diversity in the way you're communicating with people, and you need to reach out between 8 and 15 times if you want a response. So there is definitely something to be said for consistency and for persistence. You always want to start strong. So if you have a target account, going back to the planning again, if you are looking at that top 20% of your book and you're looking at those target accounts at the top of that top 20%, those accounts are ones you really want to double down on your first touch. So it works really well to have a combination of a call and an email on day 1. Reason being, it puts a person and a voice to the messaging that you're sending, letting the reader know that you didn't send an automated email, that you sent this with intention and you really do want to speak with them. So try that 1-2 combination there. Try doing an email and a phone call in the same day as your first step. Second point is that you want to alternate your manual and automated steps. So now this is for anybody that's using a sales execution platform. You don't want everything to be automated, but you also don't want to give yourself a ton of work and do everything manually. So what we typically recommend is that you do a lot of your personalized emails manually. That gives you the opportunity to personalize it, give them messaging that's relevant to them and their business, and then utilize automation for a follow-up email to bump to their inbox. So put it as a reply to the first email so it shows up on the same chain, and do something very simple, 1 sentence, 2 sentences, couple words, and ask them if now's a good time. Hey, does this week work to connect? Wanted to make sure you got my email and that you're able to connect next week. Something very short that's automated so that you can keep prospecting while these sequences or these cadences or these rhythms of communication are working for you in the background. So use a combination of manual and automated tasks. Last piece I will say here, that is utilize LinkedIn. We are seeing a lot of meetings being booked directly on LinkedIn. I will say LinkedIn is a place where people want to feel that they are growing their network. And so you have to be very careful that you're not coming in immediately asking for a meeting. It's a great way to build a relationship. So if you have a target account, follow that person, engage with their posts, comment, like things, share things. That will make it much easier when you ask them for something down the line. It's very difficult to be the sales rep who comes in on LinkedIn, sends a message immediately and says, hey, do you have time to meet this week? That person doesn't know who you are, or if you're willing to put in the time and effort to build a relationship with them. Utilize LinkedIn as the place where you're really building that relationship with them. That goes a long way. And especially, if you're a full cycle seller, that's going to help you when you close the deal and maintain the relationship down the line. You want to have a strong relationship with that person. Okay, I'm going to take a pause here, check the Q&A just to see if there are any questions on this. I'm guessing these metrics are AE focused. BDRs and SDRs would have higher output KPIs. Absolutely, yes. BDRs and SDRs, if you are focused solely on calling and emailing, KPIs can be in the hundreds. So it could be 100 plus calls a week or even a day, depending on how high volume or how big your books are. 60 connected calls. Yes. So 60 connected calls is an example of an impact metric rather than a vanity metric. So instead of asking reps to make calls, we are asking reps to have connected calls. So a connected call is either you're leaving a voicemail, you're speaking with a gatekeeper, or you're speaking with the person themselves. So a connected call just means that you actually had some sort of information you shared with a voicemail or a human, rather than just placing the call and hanging up, not leaving a voicemail, not getting through. Okay, any recommendations on where to get emails and phone numbers for potential clients? I see lots of things in the industry. We internally at Outreach use Zoom Info. I know there's other tools similar to Zoom Info you can utilize. Some folks really use LinkedIn Sales Navigator. I know that they have a tool to help with things like that. There's lots of different names, and I can definitely follow up with you with a couple of different options. Okay. Let's see. All right. What is the typical reply rate? We are getting into that next. So that will be my great bridge to my last slide here, my last couple slides. So sequence examples. We look at things internally at Outreach in two different buckets. We look at personas, and we look at people who are what we call above the line. So people who have a voice in the decision-making room and can sign the check, sign the order form, and then below the line, who are typically frontline leaders or individual contributors who may have a large voice in the room, but they're not actually the budget holder or the one that's making the decision. So knowing that, we treat these two groups separately. So we have different communication for somebody who is a BTL or a low touch persona versus an ATL or a high touch persona. And so it's important to understand the personas in your industry and how you want to communicate with them differently. Obviously, if they have different titles, they have different focuses of their roles, and your messaging should be different based off of that as well. What I have here on the right-hand side of the slide is examples of follow-up sequences and nurture sequences. So one of the greatest tools that you can utilize if you have access to a sales engagement platform is a follow-up sequence. So you'll see here in this example from Bella, she sent over some meeting times, and then she added this person to a follow-up sequence to automatically bump up her emails to make sure that this person could book time with her. So instead of her adding time to her calendar to remember to follow up with this person or to call, now she has the system working in her favor to bump this and say, following up, I want to make sure that this is something you're still interested in and you still have time to meet. So if you have the ability to use automation in that setting, highly recommend letting the system help you book your meetings when you've already done the hard work to get them to the point to say they want to meet with you. Use the system to help you secure those meetings and make sure that you are actually booking those meetings and getting them on the calendar. Last piece on here is the nurture sequences. If somebody says they're not ready for a few months, it doesn't mean that you should just not speak to them until they're ready to chat. It's really helpful if you send potentially even once a month emails where you are just providing value for them. So there are no asks in nurture sequences. They are typically gives. So it is an invitation to a webinar. It is a recommendation on a book. It is a recommendation on an article you thought would be helpful for them. Giving them things that will help them in their role and with their goals until you get to talk to them keeps you relevant in their mind, but also gives you credibility with them that you are focused on helping them with their priorities and their goals. So nurture sequences are totally selfless, focused on the prospect. And I want to clarify that these are nurture sequences where somebody is responding to you and saying, hey, thanks for reaching out. I'm not ready to talk until we have budget season in July. So a lot of companies would say you'd push that back to marketing and let marketing nurture them. I take the approach that if somebody responded to me personally, it's my responsibility to make sure that I book time with them. So I'm going to add them to a nurture sequence where I'm personally giving them recommendations focused around their business and what they're finding important. Okay, last slide here before we focus on Q&A for the last couple minutes. And this is the most successful sequences that we have running today with examples of reply rates. So this is what I look at as the 1-2 punch. And this is a BTL sequence. So those folks who may have a voice in the room, but are not necessarily signing the order form. And then an ATL sequence, those folks who are the executive buyers, decision makers, if you use Medic or MedPick. And I run these two together. So what I do is I send a sequence to typically an individual contributor where I'm saying, hey, salesperson to salesperson, I'm hoping for some intel to build a business case. Can you tell me how you like what you're using today? Or can you tell me a little bit about your workflow, your process? That gives me insight into their day-to-day so that when I go to their manager, their VP, their director, their CRO, I have a very educated perspective on their business. So now I can come to a meeting with somebody who's going to sign the order form, and I can understand how they're structuring their business, how they're doing, their prospecting, which is relevant to what I'm selling. So think about what you're selling and how you can get some insight on that business from somebody who is in a role similar to you. This is also typically where I'll use like a Sendoso or an Alice, a gifting software, to send them lunch or coffee as a thank you for the insight. And then I use this second sequence to reach out to those VP C-level personas where we are really focused on booking a meeting with these folks to talk about our platform and our product. So you'll see it's a mixture between manual emails and automated emails, mixture between calls, LinkedIn communication. That is all super critical to make sure that you are meeting them where they're working. Some C-levels and VPs are on LinkedIn all the time and don't have a great handle on their email inbox, so you may catch them better there, and same with the phone. So making sure you have a diverse way to communicate with these folks is super important. Okay, I know we only have 2 minutes left. I am going to scan the Q&A really quickly to see if there are any other questions that we can answer. For nurture sequences, you have a task to check for hiring updates. Is this set up as a manual task with no message attached, or are you tracking organizational changes within LinkedIn data? Right now, for our customer success sequences, I just focus on manual automated steps. Sales sequences have a couple of phone steps. I know there is software that will tell you if there have been hiring updates made. If you do have the benefit of using that software, that's super helpful. I typically looked at LinkedIn Sales Navigator to see if there's been any executive changes in the last week, month, and that will help me with my nurture sequences as well. How do you define which sequences are most effective? Which KPIs? That's a great question. Internally, we look at open rate. So how often folks are opening the email. We look at reply rate. I would say a great reply rate is in the 20s. If you're in the 30s, that's amazing. Open rates typically are somewhere between 30 to 50%. And then we also look at meetings booked and what your meeting conversion is. So meeting conversion is looking at the total prospects you're reaching out to versus how many meetings you're booked, and then what that conversion was from the number of prospects that you reached out to ultimately the meetings that you booked. So that is a leading indicator of pipeline, because then you can take your conversion rate from your sales stages and start to say, if we're booking this many meetings, we know our conversion rate is 32% to get somebody through the funnel to close one. Now I can start to model out my pipeline a little bit better. Okay, what's the difference in the copy in manual versus automated emails? Another great question. Thanks, Ellen. Copy is typically much simpler in automated emails, like I mentioned. So think of 1 to 2 sentences where it's just a quick bump, a reminder. Manual sequences are typically tailored to their value propositions, a little bit longer, sharing an article, sharing thought leadership. That's typically personalized to them, their industry. So I would think, 2 to 3 paragraphs on a manual email versus 1 paragraph at most in an automated email. With the 1-2 punch, do you delay adding VPC levels to give time for connections with the rep to rep? This is the last one I'll answer. Thanks, Brandon. And yes, I do. I typically give myself a week lead time with the reps to get some intel to then put it into my emails with the VPC levels.